Welcome to Justice Talks with Jennifer Burton, where we talk about legal matters that impact your life and your community issues that help you live the best life. The information presented on Justice Talks with Jennifer Burton should not be considered to be formal legal advice nor the formation of a lawyer-client relationship. It's time to talk justice. Now here's your host, Jennifer Burton.
Good Saturday evening. Welcome to Justice Talks with Jennifer Burton here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI. Jennifer is out tonight, and I am Brooks Brown, and I am sitting in for her. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you've been listening to the show for the past few weeks, we've had a variety of topics. 2 weeks ago, we had Karen Pershing from the Metro Drug Coalition in studio to talk about everything that they do, and we did a deep dive on the opioid crisis that we continue to battle here in the East Tennessee region. And then last weekend, we had Marshall Stair, who is one of the candidates for the City of Knoxville mayoral race, which is coming up in, I believe, August. Our purpose in having Marshall on, as well as all of the other mayoral candidates, is to really give all of them an option to explain to you, the voters and taxpayers, what their priorities are for the future of the city. And so we will continue that and are in the process of scheduling two other declared candidates, India Kincannon and Eddie Manis, and hoping to kind of finish up that rotation of candidates so that you can have a better and more clear understanding about what their positions are and where they stand. And we're also going to try to mix in a couple of folks that are running for city council. I think all of the seats that are up for re-election right now are term limited. So there are, no current incumbents that are running against someone that's entering into the field. So we're pretty much going to have an automatic turnover of a portion of city council. And so we also want to make sure that we're giving those people an option to come on the show and talk about what their priorities are for the city. So as you can see, and if you've been listening over the past 2 months, the show is relatively new, but the purpose is to kind of span various topics and touch on, multiple things that matter to you as a listener in the community. And, one thing that I think is special about Jennifer and is special about Burton McKinnish itself is that, I don't know, they kind of took the same approach that I took in founding my company, which was to keep it in a more boutique setting or a boutique fashion. Keep it manageable enough. If you think about marketing companies, some of them, you can talk about an agency that has hundreds of people that work for it. And you're maybe onboarding a client, and this goes for any industry. When you're talking about whether you keep your business small or allow it to expand, you onboard that client, the main person, kind of does the sales pitch, and then that client ends up in the end communicating with everyone but you. And that's something that I, as a business owner, wanted to avoid. I wanted to retain, the client interaction. And I think that that's what is kind of neat about Burton McKinnish in terms of the way that they practice law. They've limited themselves to a number of attorneys and associates. And, Jennifer is, very, very, very accessible to her clients. And I think she always talks about Burton McKinnish being your family law firm. And there are certain areas of law that they practice and certain areas that they don't. But she's one of those kind of people, and it's one of those kind of businesses where if you were to retain their services for something to deal with family law, and then maybe 6 months later needed some law with, I don't know, like copywriting or trademark law, they don't practice that. But she and they are the kind of folks that would say, I have this perfect person for you. The same with, we had a realtor on from Realty Execs talking about the real estate market here in East Tennessee recently. And, it's just one of those environments where you could literally be having a conversation with her as your attorney and say, you know, I'm looking to sell my house. And she's more than willing to say, here is the person you need to talk to. Even though I'm not a realtor, here is that person. And so I think she's just got a heart for service. And I think that is what has made them very successful. And that was what attracted us as a marketing firm to them. In terms of adding them to our docket, you know, they're a perfect kind of client to work with. You know, what we hear from the clients of theirs, their law clients, is exactly the same thing. They're the perfect kind of family law practice to work with. So her not being here tonight, obviously, you know, she can talk about the law much better than I can. I can tell you that. Yeah, I can give you the highlights that, you know, of the specific areas of law that they practice, but I can't do the deep dive like she can. So I won't even try to cross into that discussion, only to tell you that, again, without her here, make sure if you're interested in learning more about the firm that you go online and visit them on the website, burtonmckinnish.com. Or one of the easier ways, because I know that saying burtonmckinnish.com over air can be misspelled probably a lot. So you could just go to myradiolawyer.com. That's myradiolawyer.com. And that'll take you to the Burton McKinnish homepage. And you can learn more about Jennifer, read her bio, learn more about the associates, learn more about the 5 or 6 specialty areas of law that they practice. There are also a couple of free downloadable resources on the website. So if you are, for instance, I'll just focus on one. If you're considering filing for divorce, there are lots of things that you need to think about. It's not only one of the most impactful decisions that you will make in your life, not only emotionally, spiritually, financially, but it also, if you have children, has great impacts on you know, various factors of your life. And so there is a free downloadable checklist, a divorce checklist on the website. You can simply enter your name and email address and download that. That has 10 or 11 different factors that you need to consider before filing for divorce, and things that you kind of need to check off your list. And there are various checklists for other areas of the law that they practice as well. So that's just a free resource for you to try to help you, you know, answer maybe some of those questions before you would see an attorney. And of course, they offer free consultations. And so, if you are, you know, near the Maryville area or the Sevierville area, they have 2 office locations there, and can serve you at any time. So feel free to give them a call. Again, that's myradiolawyer.com. So today we're going to jump into the show, and we have a very special guest, Kim Kredich. We're going to be talking specifically today about autism, and National Autism Awareness Month was last month. We had planned on having an autism-focused show, but the guests fell through with scheduling, and so we didn't want to let the opportunity pass by. Although it's not Autism Awareness Month anymore, it's still very, very, very important, and a very important topic to talk about in general with, you know, disability. But Kim is the mother of 3 sons, one of whom was diagnosed with autism at age 2.5 in 2001, and now attends the University of Tennessee Future program. Kim has served as a volunteer advocate for hundreds of students with disabilities in East Tennessee since moving to Knoxville in 2005, when, and this is really cool, her husband Matt became the UT swim coach, and working with families to help their children gain rightful, supported inclusion in the general education environment in public schools through the IEP process. With degrees in music from Duke University and New England Conservatory, Kim created the Exceptional Orchestra Inclusive Children's Art Program as her 2003-2004 Partners in Policymaking Advocacy Program project. She continued the EXO in Knoxville from 2008 to 2010, partnering with the Knoxville Jazz Orchestra, Oak Ridge Symphony, Tennessee Children's Dance Ensemble and UT Early Learning Center in 3 original projects that showcase the inclusive power of the arts as a vehicle through which children of all abilities can learn together. Kim is an advocate member, or an active member of the Council of Parents, Attorneys, and Advocates, and works closely with various attorneys in Tennessee to promote systemic change and awareness of the rights of people with disabilities. Kim is launching a free informational website called The Volunteer Advocate in the coming weeks to assist advocacy efforts on behalf of students who have individualized education plans in the public school system. So, Kim, I'm going to welcome you in. How are you?
I'm doing great, thanks.
Good. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Great to be here.
Good. Well, hey, tell us a little bit. We're coming up on a break in about a minute and a half, but I want to know, just on a very high level, tell us about the beginning of your journey with your son who was diagnosed with autism. How'd you start finding out about some of those symptoms?
Well, Ben, who has autism and is now 20, has a twin brother, Miles, who's off at college at Savannah College of Art and Design. And then we have a younger son, Coleman, who's a senior at West, and he'll be going off to Duke University next year.
Wow.
So, yeah, all of them are going to be in college.
Yeah.
And when they were really little, imagine that, 3 kids under 3.
Yeah.
And just when Coleman had been born in Providence, Rhode Island, we moved to Virginia, and it was around that time that we started noticing some sort of different behaviors. And we went through what a lot of parents go through, and he was diagnosed with autism in August of 2001, and we learned a lot from there, as every parent does given that situation.
Yeah. Well, we're coming up on a break, and when we come back, I want to continue this discussion about your son and dive into what it is that you do as a disabilities advocate. So don't go away. You're listening to Justice Talks with Jennifer Burton here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Justice Talks with Jennifer Burton here on News Talk 98.7. Burton McKinnish can be found online at burtonmckinnish.com or by phone at 865-233-1105. And now back to your host, Jennifer Burton.
Welcome back to Justice Talks with Jennifer Burton here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI. I am obviously not Jennifer. If you're just tuning in, I am Brooks Brown. I am sitting in for Jennifer tonight, and we are joined tonight by Kim Kredich. And Kim was just telling us a little bit about the beginning of the journey that she and her family have gone through with the diagnosis of her son at 2.5 years old.
Yes.
With autism. And so, Kim, I kind of wanted to continue that discussion. So he had a twin.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And what were some of the signs that you first noticed?
Well, it was interesting because Miles, so now Ben and Miles are 20, and Miles actually wasn't talking very well. So we actually got 2 diagnoses that day, that fateful day, August 14th, 2001. And one was possible verbal apraxia, and the other was autism. And so being new parents and having twins, you just sort of survive and advance every day anyway with twins.
Sure.
And,
Can't imagine.
But Ben could actually name things, and so could talk in terms of saying, bird, waffle, tree, whatever.
Sure.
And then Miles had 5 sounds when he was 2.5.
Yeah.
And so both of them actually entered right when we moved to Richmond, Virginia. We got them both tested in Charlottesville, got those diagnoses. Coleman was 3 months old. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what does he have?
Right. Yeah.
So it was a pretty unsettling time, having just moved to a new city, a new state. And we proceeded to kind of figure out, okay, what do we do? And in Virginia, you can start public school if you have a disability at age 2. There's an overlap.
Like a Head Start kind of program?
It was actually part, there are different parts of IDEA law. So it was actually Part B. They allow it a year earlier than 3 years old, like they do here.
Right.
So we had done a little bit of early intervention because we had seen some signs of needing some OT and speech for the twins.
Sure.
But by the time we got to Richmond, they were already 2.5, so we just decided to start them in that, and they were both in a segregated special ed class.
Okay.
And I'll tell you, this is where this all started. Sometimes we just think, well, thank goodness Miles had that speech issue, because having twins, one just being a late talker, as it turned out,
right.
then Miles went on to talk perfectly well, and he can do any accent, and he can speak some languages, that he took at West. It was that we got to see, there was also another little boy in that class who was also a late talker, and they started sort of talking that year. The effect on all these other kids was just sort of magical.
Really?
Where they sort of allowed them to keep going that whole year. Maybe they should have been like ousted because they were doing so well, but the teachers couldn't believe it. All the other, having those peer models just as the
awesome.
members of their classroom. So then after that year, they sort of kicked Miles out.
Right.
And but they wanted to keep Ben. And here I was, which makes me laugh now because I'm such an inclusion person now. I wanted to keep Miles in that segregated classroom. But we actually ended up figuring out going to Head Start at Virginia Commonwealth University because they have a certain percentage that they have to enroll who have kids who have disabilities, and it doesn't take much to be over income for Head Start, and we weren't much over income, but we were, and that's another quota, 10%. So we fit both of those, and we were very lucky for them to be in a fully inclusive, wonderful classroom, each different classroom. So it's funny the way a journey starts, and the way I was lucky in a way that the twins each had their issues so that I could see the effect of inclusion and work towards it. And I'm still doing that for Ben and everybody else.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like, and I don't have children, but I do have young nephews and a young niece, who are all under 4. And it's I don't know, even as an uncle, and a godparent, it is like a gut-wrenching thing when you just hear that they're sick, or physically, or if they're having trouble in a specific area of development, which 2 of my nieces and nephews have experienced, and I won't divulge what those are, but I wonder all the time how I feel, how much I love them, and how I feel as an uncle once removed. I'm not the parent, and how I can't imagine just the just the worry that you go through as a parent all the time. I mean,
well, I actually I have a term for that.
You've raised 3 children.
Right. It's hard enough anyhow, but I call it extreme parenting.
Yeah, I'm sure it is.
The lows can be really low, but honestly, the highs can be really high. And, just in general, people say, oh my gosh, this experience has clearly, it's changed you, hasn't it?
Sure.
And I always say, well, it can't really change you, but it can definitely show you what you've got, because your life is your life. You don't know where it's going or how it's going to end up.
It's
until
relative.
Right. So I'd say it forces parents to deal with the, biggest worries in the world. Like, will my child ever talk? Will my child, all those assumptions you made, that then all of a sudden they just get wiped out because you have no idea what that path is going to look like. And, Matt and I are at a pretty cool stage of our lives where we're like, okay, this actually all...
You did it.
Yeah, we did it. For any parent, you're kind of like, woohoo, we made it through.
Yeah.
But with Ben in particular, this journey has definitely affected our lives. We've come through it with a maybe even stronger marriage than maybe we would have ever had, just because it pares you down to the bare essentials of worry, of trust, of hope, of despair. Yeah. And you really get a sense of extreme parenting. That's
Absolutely.
what I mean.
Well, and it seems like, because of what you do as a volunteer advocate, that this is an issue near and dear to your heart, obviously. But beyond that, you are putting yourself in a situation where you are, and let's repeat, a volunteer. You're not getting paid to advocate on behalf of hundreds of children and families throughout the region in the years that you've done so. And so obviously there's something even more special about you in wanting to help others and wanting to represent those families. And so, for those folks out there who are parents and have a child in the school system, whether that be, toddler age or whether they're in elementary school, and their child may have an issue where there's a consideration of a special need, and they may run into someone like you who can help them. Tell those folks out there what it is that you really do on a daily basis. Just give us a for instance in representing a family or a child in one of these meetings or in that fashion as an advocate.
Well, sure. And let me make it clear that I'm constantly trying to rid myself of what I call this unfortunate hobby. So, I don't have a business card. People find me. A lot of times people are referred to me by school employees who sit in a meeting and
Sure.
think, wait, I didn't think any kid could get a one-on-one aid. And they'll have a neighbor who has a daughter with Down syndrome and say, you got to get that lady at your meeting.
Well, and I told you before we went on air, my wife is a school psychologist, and I told her we're having a guest on. She's an advocate. Her name is Kim, and she's like, I know Kim, and she's awesome. And so, yeah, I mean, a lot of people know about you, which is great. I mean, but it is a hobby at this point, but you have a heart for it. So tell the folks out there just, kind of what it is that an advocate does. Sure.
So a lot of times I just get, I get about 7 calls or emails a week just now. And it's overwhelming, I will say. I think I've got about 55 families actively that I'm, and that's a lot of texts. That's a lot of emails. That's a lot of phone calls.
Sure.
And, it's over full time. And, but most of them, I don't have to go to their IEP meetings.
Okay.
And most of them.
And can you explain what an IEP meeting is?
Oh, yes. Okay. So every student who is eligible under a category of a disability,
right?
Autism, specific learning disability, multiple disabilities, hearing impairment. They're covered under what's called IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and that means that triggers the development of an individualized education plan with where the kid is at, what their exceptionalities are, yearly goals that address those exceptionalities.
Sure.
And then services and accommodations and modifications come from those goals. It's a really amazing process.
Sure.
I love the process and I respect it tremendously. So these IEP meetings are where the personnel involved, which requires a regular ed teacher, special ed teacher, an LEA representative, so a representative from the district who's authorized to allocate resources, and then the parents, and then an interpreter of evaluations if you have. So say, for instance, if there's a psychological evaluation, then your wife would be one of those people. So, yeah, that's the essence. That's the heart of IDEA. And they're not fun to go to, especially if it requires an advocate. I mean, I try to be very, lighthearted and kind and respectful. But make no mistake, I do not enjoy going to them. I enjoy helping people and helping kids. And that's where it happens. It happens at the IEP meeting. That's where these decisions are made. So that's what I end up doing mostly.
Okay. Well, and I think that's fascinating. So when we come back, we're up on a hard break, but when we come back, we're going to dive a little bit more into the specifics of autism and what you see in the school system. So again, we're visiting with Kim Kredich here on Justice Talks with Jennifer Burton. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Justice Talks with Jennifer Burton here on News Talk 98.7. Burton McKinnish can be found online at burtonmckinnish.com or by phone at 865-233-1105. And now back to your host, Jennifer Burton.
Welcome back to Justice Talks with Jennifer Burton here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI. If you're just tuning in, again, I am not Jennifer Burton. I'm Brooks Brown. I'm filling in for her tonight, and we are visiting and continuing our conversation with Kim Kredich, who is what she calls a volunteer advocate. for children with disabilities within the school system. And tonight we are specifically talking and doing a little bit of a deep dive on autism. But before we went to break, Kim, you were talking about some of these IEP meetings, individualized education plans. Yep. And so, parents out there may be aware of if there may be a consideration for your child, or, if you're an aunt or an uncle and that, your niece or nephew went into one of these meetings and with a parent and all these other representatives from the school. I sit back and say to myself, well, surely there's not an advocate in every single one of those meetings, right?
Oh, absolutely not.
Right.
It's quite rare, actually, because there aren't really advocates around here, too.
Sure. So my question then is, if I were a parent, why would I call an advocate versus just walking into that meeting and going solo?
Well, mostly because you've probably already been to those meetings going solo and something hasn't gone right. You didn't feel as though you were listened to. You just weren't getting the full consideration
Sure.
of placement options, like a regular education setting with an aide, for instance, or an FM device if your child has a hearing impairment. Just there are all these avenues that it can go, and if you feel like there's a roadblock, that's when I get these emails. Hi, I'm seeking an advocate. A lot of people have even taken the Vanderbilt advocacy courses, and they still are thinking, why can't I make this happen?
Right.
What's going on? And so they will
A
ask
lot of the parents have taken the course?
Yeah,
Really?
there are quite a few people who are fantastic advocates or should be in their own right. And, that's where I've been doing this for so long that I guess I have this reputation.
Sauce. Yeah, I don't know.
Because I see so many different IEPs, and I'm at so many different IEP meetings, not just in Knox County, but in Blount County, Jefferson, Anderson, you name it, just around.
Sure.
And I'll just sort of drive out there, and because I can help a kid,
Sure.
and I can help a family that family has got to be super motivated. It's not my agenda. It's got to be the family's desire for their child to access a benefit in special education that they feel is their right. Now, I'm also the first one to tell them when it isn't their right. Like, let's
Sure.
say a student is nonverbal and thinks, you know what, I need my kid to talk, so they should get like 4 hours of speech therapy a day.
Right.
And they're only getting 30 minutes, and they can be all hot and bothered about that. But I'll be the first one to say, no, the school district is correct in that, because it's about the education. Speech is a related service.
Sure.
And so it's about the educational goals. And you don't want to take that student away from the magic sauce of general education, because
Sure.
that's where they're going to learn. And that speech therapist is going to work specifically on some of those goals as they relate to the education, and then share the strategies with the general ed teacher. Then the peers can be involved in
Sure.
that. So
I think that kind of sounds to me like that panic of being a parent and knowing that your child has a disability, and you want the absolute best. You want it the quickest, best possible way that
Right.
you can. And, maybe as the parent, I mean, this is not their profession. They're not a healthcare provider. They're not a mental health practitioner. And so they're thinking, on their end, they're like, yeah, 4 hours of speech therapy a day would be awesome.
Right.
Help me. And then it takes someone like you to come in and try to, not necessarily just like temper the expectations, but help explain why the, like general education population is beneficial, to that child. And no, we don't want to take, 66% of the child's day alone with a speech therapist. We want to make sure that they're included back in the classroom as well.
Right. And what happens a lot is that people will come to me with a specific concern. We want more speech therapy. And then they send me their IEP, and the first thing I say is, well, your kid's in a segregated setting for almost the whole day.
Right.
What you actually should be wanting, because of over 4 decades of research has shown that the outcomes will be better in a regular ed setting with supports and services, even with students, or maybe even especially with students with significant disabilities, ones who, can't walk or talk. Guess what? Their progress and their outcomes are better in a regular education environment, with pull out to resource or something like that. But that environment is essential. And so then they might have come to me with a question that then I kind of temper their expectations on that. But then I say, hey, I'm looking at this IEP and guess what? And then they'll say, oh, but our district said we don't do one-on-one aids. That's restrictive. And then I bust that myth and I say, no, it's supportive of the teacher and the whole class and your student especially. So I really help frame. I give them information. I have a lot of information, and when I see their individualized education plan and they're the experts on their kids, I can talk to them specifically about what they can do in an IEP meeting. And then that's what I mean. A lot of times I don't even go. The district doesn't even know I'm involved. I've given them good information and they can take it from there. And then I always say, hey, keep me posted. Yeah. And then I'll give them a few extra things to
You're
say.
Like free advice. Yeah.
I am.
Yeah.
Well, it's
literally
all in
free.
that brain. And, I did have like you said, I've got my master's in conducting from New England Conservatory. I was headed to be I was a music teacher for quite a few years, and a conductor in Rhode Island and in Virginia.
And then your life changed.
And then I fully intended to go back to work once the kids were in school. And the sad thing is that I ended up having to take the advocacy for my son Ben on as a full-time job, and it was very stressful. Yeah. And I put aside that music career. All our kids did music, so I guess I got a little bit of
living vicariously.
Exactly, that's no problem. But I don't. Part of the reason that I help so many people is I don't want other people to have to do that.
Sure.
It's not something that I don't have any regrets, or I'm not bitter or anything. I mean, I am who I am, and I've met some of the coolest people ever. Like some of my best friends, obviously, are now people I met through this, because you go through a fight together.
Sure.
And
a very emotional one.
Yeah, and you really and there's a lot of funny stuff that happens too. It's not all like, oh, this is so depressing.
Sure.
I mean, we crack up more than most people, just because there's a lot of humor in what can happen in meetings or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's a serious business to address, because the outcome of a person's life
is
really
at stake.
It is at stake, and because school is 7 hours a day.
Right.
And that's where the magic of inclusion can happen, magic of special ed supports. And I will advocate for somebody to be in a segregated environment just as much as in a regular ed environment, if that is what the student needs. I am a full believer in what's called the continuum of placement options. I just find that, and the numbers bear it out, that we are so far below even the state average and the national average in including students with disabilities, especially significant disabilities.
That's interesting, because I think back to my days at Bearden High School, and, I've had conversations with my wife before, and she said, there were many more students that were classified as special needs for whatever reason, and you never knew it, Brooks, and they were sitting next to you in some of your classes. And when you talk about inclusion for, even those individuals who can't walk, I remember a girl specifically that was in an electronic wheelchair, and I won't divulge her name. She was awesome. I loved her to death. And she was in our classes, in regular classes. And so I think that is uber important, and I sit back and think about maybe the new kind of world that we live in with bullying, and kind of ask myself, how much different was it back in 99 when I was a senior in high school versus what it is today, what that culture of bullying is for someone that may not appear to be just like you, whether that is from a behavioral perspective or visually, and so I want to, when we come back from break, I want to talk a little bit more about if you see that culture of bullying, and what your thoughts are on that, and then also some of the most common symptoms and signs or considerations that are discussed in some of those IEP meetings or just by the parents in general. What are you seeing most often in the school systems in which you go and do your work sometimes? So we'll talk about that when we come back. Again, you're listening to Justice Talks with Jennifer Burton here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI.
You're listening to Justice Talks with Jennifer Burton here on News Talk 98.7. Burton McKinnish can be found online at burtonmckinnish.com or by phone at 865-233-1105. And now back to your host, Jennifer Burton.
Welcome back to Justice Talks with Jennifer Burton here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI. Again, I am not Jennifer Burton. I am Brooks Brown, and I am guest hosting tonight. And we are visiting with Kim Kredich tonight, who is a volunteer advocate for students and families of students who have disabilities within the school systems here in the region. And we were just talking about, I don't know, Kim, I was just kind of relating to the fact that, you know, my wife's a school psychologist. She says to me, hey, a lot of kids that you went to high school with or middle school with probably had special needs and were classified as such, but were within the general education population and came to your classes, and they got pulled out every once in a while to go do individualized care. And, you know, I remember at Bearden High School specifically, there was a special ed room, and I did feel guilty then, and I feel guilty today thinking about it. But it seemed like to me that there were kids in that room that I never, ever in 4 years even got to put an eyeball on. I never got to see them. They never got to see me. And then, fortunately, because of the way I was raised, I did not bully anyone. I was bullied because I have big ears, and they were huge when I was younger. And kids
look just fine.
Yeah, kids would flip them on the school bus, and I wouldn't stand up for myself. And but I see this culture today where it is much, much more severe than what we were talking about with, just getting your ears flipped.
Well, I'm going to give you good news on this from my perspective. First of all, back to what you said, the special ed room. You said two things that sometimes your wife said their kids identified that you wouldn't even know, but they'd go out, maybe pulled out to what's called resource room.
Right.
And resource room is considered a supplementary aid and service, just like a one-on-one aid is. It supports placement in a regular education class. So pull out to that kind of class is great. I'm in full support. Well, I'm in full support of whatever a student needs. But when you're talking about the class where you did not see the kids in there for 4 years, that's what we would consider under IDEA law a special class. Okay, so there's the regular class that includes a whole environment, including resource room.
Sure.
So even though that's a special ed class, you can't get in there unless you've got a disability under
right.
IDEA. It supports that student to be in that regular education class. A special class is what we call the comprehensive developmental classroom here in, say, Knox County and throughout the state. And that is a more restrictive setting in purpose and in a lot of times, location. It is a self-contained classroom, and it is a very different level of pull-out. It's sort of, special class. You
Sure.
can get, for instance, every school has a resource room.
Right.
But if you need a special class, comprehensive developmental classroom, at any level, what they either call like CDCA, which is a different level of severity or something, but it's still
Sure.
the same thing. CDC, CDCA, whatever. It is a special class. If your school doesn't have that, then you need to be bused to a different school. So that's the difference between those. Nobody ever gets bussed out for a resource room.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So, and what you said about that guilt, like, I never got to know those. When Matt, my husband, we got that diagnosis, and he, you look into the future, and we were very purposeful, optimistic, but, it makes you think a lot. He said, oh my gosh, now that I know so much about autism, I realized there were all these kids in Durham. He went to public schools in Durham, North Carolina, where he grew up. And he said, there were these kids out in a portable, and they were really weird. And one of them would only walk along they'd have recess with us sometimes, and they'd walk along, or somebody knew all the baseball stats. And he's like, gosh, oh my gosh.
Sure.
And he said, I feel terrible. We used to kind of like, not.
You look at them as if they're different.
Right. They didn't bully them face to face, but they definitely
you think differently.
And what I would say is the beauty of what is happening or should happen more today as IDEA strengthens and the verdict is in. Inclusion causes the best outcomes not only for students with disabilities, but for students without.
Sure. When
that inclusion model is implemented, everybody wins because and then you get like just growing up with our son Ben, I can't tell you the number of his classmates at Sequoia and Vine and West who are now going into occupational therapy, speech therapy, special ed. They're constantly texting me like, "Oh, I'm so excited! I got into my master's of special ed."
Awesome.
I'm like, "You're gonna be," and Ben inspired me. Good, because if you do not have kids included, you will not get to know them, and you will not be able to benefit from.
It only makes sense,
right?
Yeah, and you talk about that situation with Matt, and then I'm sure that everyone out there, every adult, every caring and loving adult who's gone through school can relate. And didn't have a disability can relate. And so you do, at this point in your life, look back and say, it shouldn't be that way. First off, we realized that we were kids and we viewed them differently because they had been purposefully separated from us. And so when a portion of the population is purposefully segmented from you, the mind goes to that place where you're like, well, they're different. But being different doesn't mean that there's anything wrong. It's okay to be different.
Well, and
that's what's beautiful about us.
It is, and I think that one of the biggest misconceptions out there, which I'm happy to just lay out as the truth, is people naturally think, oh, if a student can't keep up with the third grade class or kindergarten or whatever, they shouldn't be in that class. And that is actually the opposite of the case, because a student can be at any academic level, any adaptive level, any behavioral level, and you still, under IDEA law, you must give the first consideration to the regular ed environment with a full range of supports and services. Even if a student, let's say in 10th grade geometry, is still working on triangle, trapezoid, circle.
Sure.
Guess what? That's what they will learn. That It's that environment. And I'm not saying, that's sort of a bizarre case maybe, but not really, because students on the alternate assessment, which is a different assessment and different programming, who are in the bottom 1% of the population in terms of skill level, can be and should be, first consideration must be that regular ed setting, which so many people don't understand, that it is not an ability level. Now, will that student get a regular ed diploma? No.
Right.
Especially if they're on the alternate assessment. There's actually a new diploma called alternate academic diploma that they can work towards, with significant differences, like really big differences in the expectations for the academic standards. And that is where the path is just wide open for any student of any ability level to move through our school system in the best possible way for that student. That's what individualized that's what the I in IEP means.
Sure.
Individualized. And I think a lot of myths need to be busted around here, especially because I still hear them all the time. And that's a big reason I'm at these meetings.
Yeah.
That is a big reason, because I can very respectfully and, I hope eloquently explain that, because I've done it so many times now. And you'll sort of see the shock on people's faces when I say, look at the Tennessee Department of Education website. It's giving all this training to regular ed teachers how to instruct a student on the alternate assessment who's in their regular ed class.
Well, we could talk about this for hours, because the information, it's like I just kind of want to take your brain and be like, let's make copies of this and pass this around to the school systems and make this available to, all the parents out there who may not feel represented well enough or adequately capable of expressing and, communicating in some of these meetings. And so I know that there aren't enough of you. And you had mentioned a new website that you were working on. So tell us about, tell us what is the address going to end up being? Is it up yet?
It's not up yet. I just got Miles to create a really cool logo for it. And
cool.
It's just an free informational website. Just as you were saying, at a certain point, especially with a senior graduating, sometimes I'm going to 3 IEP meetings a day. That's 6 or 7 hours and they're not fun. It's helpful for people, but Matt and I had a big, okay, what am I going to do now?
Yeah, have a heart-to-heart.
And it was because I've kept hoping that our school system, especially now they've got the chance to hire a brand new special ed director because the current one is retiring. And I've been up in front of the school board and said, let's go from the outside. So I'm developing a website called thevolunteeradvocate.com.
Well, what we'll do is whenever that site is up, you'll let us know. We'll put that information out on social media, share it with folks, because, again, what you do as an advocate is so very important. Thank you so much for coming in today and tonight and talking to us a little bit about autism, your journey, and what it is that you do on a volunteer basis. And thank you for doing that, because there are people out there who need you and other folks like you who are like-minded. So we'll be back next weekend with another great show. We're going to be talking about Foster Parent Awareness Month with some folks from DCS and all of the different options that you would potentially have as a foster parent. So make sure to tune into that show next Saturday night at 6 p.m. Thanks for tuning in tonight to Justice Talks with Jennifer Burton here on News Talk 98.7. We'll see you next week.